The day I found out I was pregnant, my husband David was at the hospital, accompanying his widowed sister-in-law, Grace, for a prenatal checkup. When he saw me, there wasn't a trace of concern in his expression. Instead, he told me he wanted a divorce. He said Grace was pregnant and in order to get the birth permit, they had to go through with the divorce. He assured me it was only a fake divorce and that our relationship was still real. He promised that once the baby was born, we would go to the registry office and remarry. I didn't cry or make a fuss. I nodded and agreed, without hesitation, because in my previous life, I had used the baby inside me to threaten him with my own life, refusing to agree to the divorce. I managed to keep that marriage certificate, but Grace ended her life by jumping into the river the very next morning, taking her unborn child with her. 2 lives gone in an instant. David didn't say anything openly, but deep down he believed I was behind it all. When I was 8 months pregnant, he reported me for illegal trading and had me sent to the Northwest for reform. Through labor, in the dead of winter, both my unborn child and I were tortured to death. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day I found out I was pregnant. The same day, David held Grace and told me he wanted a divorce. This time I took the initiative and signed the divorce papers. Helping Grace was the right thing to do. Don't worry, I told him. I absolutely won't stand in the way. David quickly snatched the divorce papers from my hands. He carefully checked the signature before he believed I had truly agreed. Emily, once the baby is born, we'll remarry. Just bear with it for now, he said. The smile he couldn't quite hide on his lips stood in stark contrast to the fleeting trace of guilt in his eyes. I forced myself to swallow the disgust rising in my stomach and said calmly, Grace is pregnant. This is a big deal for the family. I'm not that petty. David looked deeply moved when he heard this and tried to reach for my hand. Before he could touch me, Grace leaned into his arms and said weakly, David, I'm not feeling well. Can you carry me in for the checkup? David instantly grew nervous and scooped her up in his arms. In his eyes, I saw a tenderness I had never known before. In my past life, I always thought that because he was a soldier, he had to suppress his emotions. But ever since my brother-in-law died and my mother-in-law demanded that David supervise and protect Grace, I realized he had a soft side, too. He gave all his military stipends to Grace and even handed over the fabric coupons I had saved up for 3 years just so she could have a new dress made in the latest style. Back then, I foolishly consoled myself, thinking he only pied Grace for becoming a widow at such a young age, and that's why he showed her so much care. But then Grace was found to be pregnant, and David brought up divorce. I had resisted with everything I had, thinking I was saving our marriage. It turned out to be the biggest joke of my life. At 8 months pregnant, I was left to freeze to death on the grasslands of the Northwest. The baby inside me died with me, crushed under the weight of betrayal. Right before I closed my eyes, I finally saw things clearly. David's heart had never been mine. He had always loved Grace. I regretted everything. If there were a next life, I swore I would stay far away from David Carter. Maybe heaven took pity on me because somehow I was given a second chance. Emily, I'm caught up with something here. When you have time, can you take these to the political officer? David handed me the divorce papers. It still needs approval, and the sooner we get it done, the sooner we'll have peace of mind. While I stood there stunned, he pressed the papers into my hands. I suppressed the overwhelming wave of regret and took them with a forced smile. All right, I'll take care of the formalities. You go do what you need to do. David let out a sigh of relief, then leaned closer and whispered in my ear. Emily, please keep this divorce matter quiet. Grace has always been frail, and if rumors start spreading, I'm afraid she won't be able to handle it. You've always been so understanding. I know. You'll see where I'm coming from. In our 5 years of marriage, this was the first time David had ever praised me. But it was for the sake of another woman and I didn't want it. I calmly nodded, took the divorce papers and delivered them to the political officer. In 7 days, once the paperwork was finalized, I would be free of David Carter for good. On my way home, I stopped by the community clinic and made an appointment for an abortion. As I walked out, I saw David holding Grace in his arms as they got into a military jeep. In my past life, even when I had a high fever, David wouldn't drive me to the hospital. He once told me the jeep was an official government vehicle and that giving me a ride would count as abuse of power. In the end, I had no choice but to ride a heavy old bicycle to the hospital. Because I missed the optimal treatment window, I developed a serious case of pneumonia. But it wasn't until today that I finally realized his so-called refusal to abuse power applied only to me. In my past life, I even saw his behavior as admirable, like something out of a Soviet military model textbook. Swallowing the bitterness in my chest, I walked 20 li over 6 miles under the blazing sun and cloth shoes, completely drenched in sweat back home. When I opened the door, Grace was lounging on the couch under the fan, eating a popsicle. Meanwhile, my clothes were completely soaked through from sweat. "Oh, Emily, you look so hot," she called out gleefully. "If I'd known, I would have told David to bring you back earlier since he was heading this way." Before her voice even faded, David walked in carrying a thick slab of fatty pork. Without so much as a glance at me, he casually shoved the meat into my hands and ordered, "Go cook dinner." Grace wants braised pork. I already picked up the rice. I looked at the meat that had cost me half a month's wages, and said nothing. I just took it into the kitchen, prepared the braised pork, and brought it out. David and Grace were already sitting at the table, the dishes and chopsticks laid out, except there were none for me. I went straight to the kitchen, grabbed a bowl and chopsticks for myself, and sat down on the sofa. Then I began eating the braised pork by myself, bite after bite. David froze, stunned, and then snapped at me. "Emily, what the hell are you doing? How can you just eat by yourself? Can't you see there are others here? We haven't even started yet. How could you be so selfish?" I smiled coldly. Selfish? In my past life, I wasn't selfish enough. That's why every penny I pinched, every food coupon I saved through sacrifice ended up feeding these 2 animals. And me, I was just a pale, thin woman barely weighing 90 pounds. By the time I was in my 20s. But in this life, not a single cent, not a single ounce of my effort would go to this household. Soon, I finished every last piece of that braised pork. David, furious, stomped over to the canteen and returned with 2 dishes, both the cheapest vegetable sides they had left. Because he'd already used up almost all his food coupons. For once, I ate a meal that made me feel completely satisfied. After washing the dishes, I returned to my room, locked the door behind me, and pulled a small box from under the bed. Inside were all the meat coupons, food coupons, and cash my mother had mailed to me over the years from the capital. Since I got married. Back then, I had stubbornly insisted on marrying David Carter, a poor boy with no future, choosing to stay in the countryside with him as he was stationed with the military. My father had been so furious. He even sent a telegram saying he was cutting ties with me. Blinded by what I thought was love, I ignored all their warnings. But now, after living through 2 lifetimes, just looking at these things made my eyes burn. These were from the people who truly loved me. Carefully, I packed everything into the hidden inner pocket of my suitcase. Then, I pulled out a sheet of letter paper and wrote a telegram to my parents back in the capital. In it, I told them clearly that I had divorced David Carter and asked them to help me get a letter of recommendation to return home. Just as I finished writing, there was a knock at the door. Annoyed, I opened it and there was David putting on a fake smile. "Emily, we're all family. Don't you think you went a little too far today? Let's just forget it ever happened. All right? Tomorrow morning, make a couple of Boiled eggs for Grace. She's been looking a little thin lately. I glanced behind him where Grace was lounging on the couch, her cheeks glowing with perfect health, and laughed. Sorry, I'm busy. And David, don't forget we're divorced. I'm not part of your family. The next morning, I sent the telegram. And then headed to the black market, where I sold my position as a state-owned shop clerk for 50 yuan. In my past life, David had accused me of illegal trading. The shop manager didn't hesitate to convict me and report me to the village brigade. This time, I wouldn't give them the chance. When I got home and finished packing, Grace returned. She walked in, pride glowing in her eyes. Emily, I honestly pity you. Your husband never loved you. Even all those times he slept with you over the years, he was thinking about me. Her words struck like lightning. Suddenly, everything made sense. Every time we were intimate, David would insist on turning off the lights. Again and again. In the dark, he would whisper, Grace. Grace. All those years I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, he felt something for me too because of those moments. But now, remembering it clearly, I realized David never once called me by that name in our daily lives. Only in those moments did he say it with such passion. The Grace in his heart was never me. Seeing that I was stunned, Grace only grew more smug and said triumphantly, let me tell you the truth. I grew up with both David and his older brother, Mark. Mark was always sickly since we were little. We all knew this day would come eventually, so of course I was always going to marry David. As for you, you're just a pathetic fool who begged your way in with food and fabric coupons. Grace thought I was stunned into silence by her words, but my mind had already started replaying something. She just said it was true. Mark, David's older brother, had always looked weak and pale since the first time I met him. Could someone like that really have fathered the child Grace was carrying? And then I remembered the way David used to look at her with that doting fatherly gaze. I remembered how right after Mark died, my mother-in-law had suggested David take care of both households. Now, it all made sense. Those two had already been conspiring together for a long time. That's why in my past life, when David pretended he didn't want the divorce, Grace threw herself into the river. And then he turned around and blamed me for it. Said I was the one who had pushed her. Said I caused the death of both her and my own unborn child. While I stood there dazed, Grace caught sight of a piece of paper lying on my bed. What's this? You're pregnant? I snatched the hospital slip from her hand. Without a word, I was just about to tell her I had already scheduled a termination when, before I could speak, she suddenly grabbed my arm and slammed it into her own belly. Her long fingernails dug into my skin, leaving a harsh mark. I cried out in pain and tried to pull away, but she used the momentum to throw herself to the floor. Help! She's trying to kill a pregnant woman. Before I could even process what had just happened, I heard David's hurried footsteps behind me. He shoved me to the ground without hesitation and rushed to gather Grace into his arms. Grace, are you okay? Where does it hurt? Then he turned and glared at me, eyes full of rage. Emily, are you out of your mind? She's pregnant. How could you lay a hand on her? You're absolutely crazy. A violent, selfish shrew. Caught off guard, I stumbled and hit my hip hard against the floor. The pain shot through me like a jolt, and I curled into myself. Just as I was about to cry out, Grace weakly collapsed into David's arms. The baby, save my baby, David. It hurts so much. I think I'm going to lose it. As she said it, she cast a triumphant glance at the pool of blood spreading beneath me, but David didn't even seem to see me. He lifted her up in panic and rushed out toward the clinic. Don't worry, I won't let anything happen to you or the baby. The commotion quickly drew a crowd from the neighborhood. Only when they saw the trail of blood beneath me did someone finally gasp and rush to get a tricycle to take me to the clinic. Just before I was wheeled into the operating room, the same doctor who had helped Schedule my abortion earlier came out to check on me. I clutched his arm weakly. Barely able to speak, move the procedure. Up. I want the abortion now. He looked down at the heavy bleeding between my legs, face tightening with concern. Comrade, even if you wanted to keep it now, I don't think it's possible anymore. Someone prep the O. We need to induce labor immediately. She's losing too much blood. As I was wheeled inside, I finally let go and closed my eyes. The anesthesia slowly seeped through my veins. A single tear slipped from the corner of my eye. It was finally over. Whatever existed between David Carter and me, it was truly finished now. For the next few days, I lay alone in the cold hospital room. No one came to check on me. On the day I was discharged, I planned to go thank the doctor who had handled my procedure. As I walked toward the staircase, I saw David's mother, Margaret Carter, helping Grace into the adjacent exam room. I hesitated, then quietly followed them. Inside, the doctor was finishing a prenatal exam and announced, "The baby's healthy. You can go home." Margaret beamed as she helped Grace out of the room. Once they were gone, I slipped inside and glanced at the medical record they'd left on the desk. It said Grace was 2 months and 3 days pregnant. But I remembered clearly. They had always claimed she was 3.5 months along. Mark had died exactly 3 months ago. I had been right all along. The baby wasn't Mark's. It was David's. With that realization, I quickly tore off the part of the medical record with the pregnancy date. It was time to settle this debt. On the way home, I stopped by the post office and picked up a telegram. It was from my parents in the capital. It contained the return letter of introduction I had requested. With this letter, I could finally go home. I was still clutching the telegram when I walked back through the military housing compound. As I passed by, the other wives were already gossiping. "Did you hear? She had an affair and got caught by Commander Carter himself. No wonder he was so furious that day. Beat her so badly she bled." Exactly. What a shameless little. I can't believe she dared to come back. So much for the dignity of a soldier's wife. So that's what they'd done. During the days I was in the hospital, they must have twisted the story, pinned the divorce on me so David could be with Grace out in the open. What a perfect scheme. I ignored their whispers and pushed open the door to my house. There, sitting neatly on the table, was a red divorce certificate. My luggage had been thrown carelessly onto the floor. David Carter had made his final move. "You're already divorced from David, Margaret." Carter snapped from the sofa before I even stepped through the door. "Take your things and get out." In my past life, this woman had taken no small number of my food and meat coupons, and now she thought she could throw me out. Just like that. Not so easy this time. I immediately dropped to the floor and burst into loud, dramatic sobs. "Fine. I'll leave. But only after you give back everything you've eaten and worn from me all these years." My voice rang out so loudly that neighbors in the compound began gathering at the doorway, whispering as they peeked in. Margaret's face turned from pale to green with embarrassment. She pointed at me and cursed, You dare ask us for coupons? Back in the day, a woman like you would have been drowned in a pig cage. Shameless, absolutely disgraceful." With tears and snot streaming down my face, I cried even louder. "Ladies, you be the judge. I worked at the state-run store earning 30 yuan a month. But look at me, skinny as a stick in patched up clothes. Why? Because my glorious commander husband gave 50 yuan every month to his widowed sister-in-law." The other wives gasped and turned to stare at Grace. "She's just a widow and she's not even pretending to mourn. White and chubby, wearing a brand new Dacron blouse like she's royalty. Meanwhile, look at poor Emily, thin as a twig and dressed in rags." The wife of the political instructor was the first to speak up for me, and soon the rest of the wives were buzzing with indignation. Margaret, now visibly panicking, quickly stood up to defend herself. Don't listen to her nonsense. I was the one helping her save part of her wages because she's young and doesn't know how to manage money. That's all. She's trying to twist everything now. Then muttering to herself, forget it. I'm done arguing with you. She pulled out 50 yuan from her pocket and shoved it into my hand. Here, this is your saved money. Take it. I took the money without hesitation and stuffed it in my pocket. Then I picked up my luggage and walked out. I found an old abandoned thatched hut nearby and rested there for a while, because the real show had only just begun. Late that night, I quietly returned to the compound. In their hurry to kick me out, Margaret had forgotten to ask for the house key. I pressed my ear to the paper window and could hear sounds from inside. Moaning and Grace's voice gasping, David, be careful of the baby. So, the moment I left, the two of them couldn't wait to jump into bed. Even pregnant, she wasn't the least bit afraid. Since they were putting on such a good show, it would be a shame if I were the only one to see it. I swung open the door, flicked on the overhead light, and shouted at the top of my lungs, help. Everyone come quick. The commander is having an affair. My voice echoed down the hallway, triggering the motion sensor lights. The wives and the nearby units rushed out in their night clothes to see what the commotion was about. As soon as they peeked in, they saw David stumbling around shirtless, trying to pull up his pants. Emily, what do you think you're doing? He shouted. It's the middle of the night. And you barge into my home. We're divorced. Even if I was with someone else, that's none of your business. I let out a cold laugh. You're right. If you were with someone else, I wouldn't care. But if you're with someone I know, then yeah, I do care. Maybe you two were already sneaking around before the divorce and tried to pin the cheating label on me. Instead, before I could finish, Grace stormed out of the bedroom in a rush, her buttons all misaligned. Emily, stop spouting nonsense. You're trying to ruin our reputation. Then she turned to the crowd, her voice falsely sweet. Ladies, yes, it's true. David and I are together. We're planning a wedding banquet soon. You all know Emily cheated. First, David caught her in the act. That's why they divorced. And David and I were just two lonely people who happened to fall in love. Her shamelessness actually made me laugh. Even now, she was trying to stick that label on me. So, you're saying you two only got together after David and I divorced? I asked slowly. Grace glanced nervously at the neighbors before stiffly nodding. Oh, of course. What do you take me for? Unlike you, I have morals. I stepped forward and said sharply, really? Because the truth is, while your husband's body was barely cold, you were already sleeping with mine. You want to talk morals? Who's the one with none? Grace's face turned the color of raw liver. You're lying. Emily. I'll sue you for slander. David growled. Emily, enough. Don't make a fool of yourself in front of everyone. All right, folks. He added quickly, trying to shoo the crowd away. Let's all go. There's nothing to see here. I watched him, desperate to sweep this all under the rug. The great commander Carter, so quick to clean house once he was caught red-handed. I laughed out loud. What are you afraid of? Could it be that you've done something guilty? David Carter gritted his teeth. Impossible. I've always acted upright and honorable. Stop spreading nonsense. Is that so? Then you better take a good look at this. I pulled Grace's medical record out of my pocket and held it up. Hi. Pregnant for 2 months and 3 days, but your brother's been dead for 3 full months now, Commander Carter. So, tell me, who's the father of this child? David clearly hadn't expected me to have the medical record. He froze on the spot, completely stunned. Behind him, Mrs. Wong, the wife of the political instructor, stepped forward and took the record from my hand. She was a doctor at the clinic, so she recognized the authenticity at a glance. It's true. 2 months and 3 days, she said. Commander Carter, you have Some explaining to do. David stood there. Like a statue, unable to say a word. It was Grace who finally panicked and rushed forward. No, it's not like that. She's lying. Don't be fooled by her. She lunged toward me, trying to cause a scene again. But this time, as soon as her arm brushed against mine, I immediately threw myself to the ground, clutching my stomach and crying out. Ah, it hurts. Oh my God, it hurts. Just a few days ago, you two pushed me to the ground and forced me to have an abortion. I wailed loudly. And now, you're hitting my stomach again. Hearing me accuse her of violence, Grace's face went pale. No. No. She fell on her own. She stammered, trying to defend herself. But before she could finish, David, looking like a man shattered into pieces, shoved her aside. She nearly stumbled to the floor if not for the people crowding around. Emily, you miscarried. Was the baby mine? Seeing him standing there disheveled and heartbroken, I sneered. Thanks to you. Yes, the child is gone. Just about a month old. David's eyes reamed. Instantly. I didn't know you were pregnant. Otherwise, I never would have. Grace rushed forward in a panic, grabbing David's arm. David, what do you mean by that? If she had your child, then what about my baby? Would it be a fatherless bastard? Her words confirmed everything in an instant. The crowd around us buzzed with murmuring. The truth could no longer be hidden. Grace lost all reason and kept demanding answers from David, tugging on his arm, crying hysterically. He finally shook her off roughly. If it weren't for you begging me after Mark's death to leave you a child, I never would have crossed that line. Grace's face twisted in rage. She slapped David hard across the face. Now you're blaming me. David Carter, are you even a man? Who was it that couldn't keep his hands off me every night? The vulgarity of her words drew disgusted glances from the surrounding military wives. If there was one thing they hated more than anything, it was women who seduced someone else's husband. As the crowd's disgust grew louder, Grace completely broke down. She lunged forward and bit David's arm, and soon the two of them were fighting, each accusing the other like a pair of wild dogs. News of David Carter and Grace's affair spread through the compound like wildfire. Even Margaret Carter rushed over in a panic, sobbing and begging me not to report them, claiming she had forced David to watch over Grace and thus led to their mistake. She even got down on her knees, pleading. I merely smiled coldly. The humiliation and betrayal I had suffered in my past life. This time I would make sure they were paid back in full. Early the next morning, several wives from the neighborhood accompanied me to the political officer to officially report David Carter and Grace for violating military marriage regulations. The scandal was so serious that the regiment needed time to investigate. I didn't stay to see the outcome. I immediately went to the station and bought the soonest train ticket back to the capital. I returned home, gathered my packed belongings, and left. I hadn't expected to run into David at the train station right before departure. He came rushing in, chasing after me, but I didn't even spare him a glance. I just prayed for the train to leave. Faster, faster, faster. After a few hours of bumpy travel, the train finally pulled into the capital city. Following the streets I remembered from my childhood, I made my way back to the courtyard where I had grown up. Stepping into the familiar place, it felt like I had been reborn. Just as I was soaking in the bittersweet feeling, a familiar voice called out behind me, Shia, is that you, Shiawa? I turned around and saw my mother, now with gray streaks in her hair, standing there. I rushed into her arms and hugged her tightly. In my past life, I couldn't even imagine how devastated she must have been after losing me. Thankfully, heaven had given me another chance. Mom, I'm sorry. I was so unfair. I choked out. She hugged me even tighter. It's enough that you're back. You're back. That's all that matters. Like a child, I clung to her, feeling all the pain and humiliation I had suffered melt away in an instant. When we got home, my father sat solemnly in the living room, clearing his throat. "So, you do remember how to come home?" he said gruffly. "I thought you'd forgotten your own name." In the past, I never understood my father's stern and quiet love. But now, seeing the redness in his eyes, I ignored his stiff demeanor and rushed forward to hug him. "Dad," I whispered. "Thank you. From now on, I promise I'll listen and behave," I said. That night, Mom made my favorite dishes, braised lion's head meatballs and slow-cooked pork ribs. During dinner, Dad asked me about my plans. He said if I wanted to continue my education, I could sit for the adult college entrance exam. Or if I preferred, I could work with him at the Agricultural Research Institute to help contribute to the nation's food development efforts. In my mind, a memory flashed of my past life, peeking through a tiny window at the golden fields outside, so free, so vast, so full of promise. I nodded immediately. "Dad, I want to go with you to the Agricultural Research Institute." The next morning, I followed Dad to report for work at the institute. Although my time in the countryside had given me some basic knowledge about crops, it was far from professional. Dad assigned me to be mentored by an older student, Tom Williams. I worked extremely hard, cherishing this opportunity that had come only after living two lives. During the day, I observed plants carefully in the research, soaking up every bit of knowledge like nutrients like plants. At night, I buried myself in the institute's archives, poring over past research records until late evening. Though the days were busy and exhausting, they left me feeling grounded, fulfilled in a way I had never known before. 3 months later, I had fully adapted to this busy but meaningful life. I hadn't expected that. One evening on my way home from work, I would run into David Carter standing outside the family compound. As soon as he saw me, he rushed over. "Emily, I've been looking everywhere for you. I finally found you." I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. Gone was his crisp military uniform. He now wore a faded, worn-out work jacket. I looked at him coldly. "What do you want?" "If I remember correctly, there's nothing between us anymore." David, who used to be so arrogant, now looked humbled. He started to reach for my arm, but hesitated when he noticed the new, stylish clothes I wore and the prestigious wristwatch on my hand. He awkwardly pulled his hand back and forced a flattering smile. "Emily, I know you're still mad at me, but back then I really only divorced you to get the birth permit. I swear I've completely cut ties with Grace now. I'm here today to bring you home." I couldn't believe it. For Grace, he could kill me and our unborn child without blinking. Now that I had willingly let them go, he had the nerve to come crawling back to me. But no matter what his real motive was, just seeing his face made my heart twist with rage and grief, bringing back the memory of my lost child. I didn't want to look at him for even one more second. "David Carter, don't disgust me," I said sharply. "A man who sleeps with his widowed sister-in-law and even gets her pregnant. I wouldn't take you back if you were the last man on earth." Without another glance at him, I turned and called out to the guards stationed by the gate. "This man is harassing me. Make sure he's never allowed near the compound again." 2 strong guards immediately came over, picked David up like a sack of potatoes, and tossed him outside. I thought that would be the end of it. But unbelievably, the next day, he showed up at the entrance of the Agricultural Research Institute, shouting at the top of his lungs for me to forgive him. Furious, I stormed over. "David Carter, what the hell are you trying to pull? We're divorced. Stop harassing me." But no matter how loudly I yelled, David refused to leave. It was right before work, so a crowd of institute workers gathered to watch the scene. Just when I was at a loss for what to do, a military jeep pulled up. I turned and saw it was my father. Before I could say anything, David rushed over and threw himself to the ground, kneeling before him. "Dad, I'm David Carter, your son-in-law. He recognized my father instantly, even though they had never met before. I quickly remembered how yesterday when I ran into Mrs. Wang, the wife of the political officer who had transferred back from the city, she had told me that ever since the affair scandal, David had been expelled from the party and discharged from the military. He was now just a jobless nobody. Now it all made sense. He wasn't here for me. He had found out about my father's real identity. He had come groveling, hoping to marry back into a powerful family. He didn't love me. He wanted status. I hurried forward, ready to warn my father not to pay him any attention. But Dad gave me a calm, reassuring look. You're divorced from my daughter. What are you doing here? Dad asked coldly. David immediately plastered on a flattering smile. Sir, there was a misunderstanding between Emily and me. After my brother died, my mother forced me to leave an heir through my widowed sister-in-law. I refused at first, but when they threatened to kill themselves, I had no choice but to agree to a fake divorce with Emily. We promised to remarry after the baby was born. As for the baby Emily lost, I swear I didn't know she was pregnant. I would have taken better care of her if I had known. He lowered his head, looking pitiful. Father-in-law, I was wrong. I was really wrong, David cried. I've already talked it over with my family. They're even arranging for Grace to meet other people. From now on, no one will interfere in my life with Emily again. The more he spoke, the more excited he became, completely oblivious to how my father's face went from pale to green, then darkened into a deep black. Before I came home, I had only briefly explained to my parents that David and I divorced due to incompatibility. I hadn't told them the dirty truth behind it, afraid it would worry them. But who would have thought that David would spill all the disgraceful details himself? So, what you're saying is, you're here today to beg us to take Emily back, Dad said, voice cold. David immediately lunged forward on his knees, clutching Dad's pants and sobbing. Father-in-law, I'm here to bring Emily home. Please, I'm begging you. Help me. Plead with her. I truly love her. If she refuses to come back with me, I'll cut ties with my family. I'll give up everything just to be with her. Watching David grovel, willing to abandon Grace and their unborn child without a second thought, just like he abandoned me and my unborn baby in the past life, I could only marvel at how blind I had once been to love a man like this. The next second, my father harshly shoved him aside. You beast. Who the hell are you? Calling father? Trash, like he wasn't fit to marry my daughter. David clearly hadn't expected this kind of outcome. He sat there frozen for a long while before stammering. You're really willing to let Emily be alone forever? She's a divorced woman who's had a miscarriage. What decent man would want her? My father, furious, kicked him hard enough to knock him flat onto the ground. You think you're somebody? Let me tell you, there are plenty of outstanding young men lining up to marry my daughter. No sooner had Dad finished speaking than Tom Williams came running over from a short distance away. Professor son, I like Emily. If she's willing, I want to marry her. Over the past few months, I wasn't blind to Tom's feelings. His gaze had always been sincere. But back then, I had been focused solely on my research and hadn't given him any response. However, for the sake of utterly crushing David's delusions this time, I stepped forward and hooked my arm through Tom's. Dad, this is the man I'm dating now, I said with a smile. And I like him very much. My father nodded in satisfaction, then turned to David and said, see, a university student loves my daughter. And you? What are you compared to him? Then, without wasting another second, he called over the guards. They tied David up and physically threw him out. The commotion was loud and news of David's humiliation spread quickly. Soon everyone in the village knew what he had done. From then on, whether it was David, Grace, or even Margaret Carter, every time they walked The streets, they were spat on and cursed at. In the end, they had no choice but to pack up and leave town in disgrace. 2 years later, I boarded a train headed to the Northwest carrying newly developed wheat seats for research. As I looked out at the familiar passing scenery, it felt like another lifetime. In my past life, I had been forcibly dragged onto a train, unable to see or enjoy anything. But now, the beautiful landscapes filled my view. Beside me sat Tom Williams. We had gotten married last year. He treated me with such care and gentleness, filling the void that marriage had left in my heart the first time. We soon arrived at the Northwestern Agricultural Research Institute for a field study. One summer day, while inspecting crops, I unexpectedly ran into David Carter. All the farmers stood neatly in rows, but only one leaned heavily on crutches. I looked closer. He was missing a leg. The once proud and upright David was now an old, broken man with white hair, thin as a skeleton. I wasn't surprised. I had stayed in contact with Mrs. Wong, the wife of the political officer, and learned the whole story. After being expelled from the military, David and Grace had moved to the Northwest to join a land reclamation project, lured by promises of free food and housing. That same year, David married Grace and their child was born. But good fortune didn't last. Last year, Grace made a careless mistake that caused Margaret Carter to die of carbon monoxide poisoning. Their infant child, not yet 1 year old, died with her. David, who had been on duty in the fields that day, rushed back in a panic, only to get into a terrible accident. Along the way, losing a leg. Emily. It's been so long. You've changed so much. I almost didn't recognize you, David said, his voice. I had changed. Indeed. My hairstyle was different. My clothes were the latest fashionable designs, and every gesture reflected a confidence and culture he could no longer reach. I was no longer the pale, shabby girl he once looked down on. I simply nodded, uninterested in chatting further, and turned to leave. Behind me, I heard the voice of the local field officer calling out, "Professor Sun, thank you so much for visiting and guiding us. It's truly an honor for us." I smiled politely and began following the officer for the inspection around the fields. Meanwhile, David Carter stood where he was, murmuring to himself as he stared after my departing figure. The next day, we formed a local research team and were preparing to give a presentation about the current state of the farmlands in the Northwest. Just as we were about to begin, a commotion erupted outside. "Emily's son, get out. Here, you shameless woman." A screechy voice howled. "You ruined my family. I'm going to report you to the authorities, so everyone can see what kind of person you really are." Following the voice, I walked toward the entrance and was stunned to see Grace standing there. Her face was haggard and weathered, looking easily 10 years older than she was. She was thinner now than she had been even in my past life, her body like a shriveled shadow of what it once was. "And what exactly are you accusing me of?" I said calmly. Little Lee from the research office, who had been helping me lately, was furious. "That's right. Ever since Professor Sun came to the Northwest, she's either been in the lab or buried in the archives. Where would she even have the time to mess with your so-called family? If you ask me, it's your own husband you can't keep control of, and now you're just here to throw a tantrum." Grace's eyes were bloodshot with anger. She shrieked. "It's all because of you. Ever since you showed up yesterday, he's been treating me like garbage. Called me a wrinkled hag. It's all your fault, Emily Sun. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have lost my job and ended up living like this." I almost laughed out loud. "And how exactly is that my fault?" I said. "Maybe you should take responsibility for your own miserable life instead of blaming others." Seeing that I remained calm and composed only enraged Grace even more. She started shouting again just as a group of city officials who had come to inspect our research progress arrived. Hearing her slander a researcher who had just received a major award, the officials were furious. They immediately called for the security guards to arrest Grace and informed the site leaders about the situation. Given that Grace had been lazy and careless in her work for some time and now had stirred up a public scandal, they finally had a valid excuse to fire her outright. After Grace was released from custody and learned she had been officially terminated, she couldn't take the blow. Overwhelmed by despair, she threw herself into the river and ended her life. When David Carter received the news, he actually smiled. Finally, he was free of Grace. He then tried to pivot to agriculture, hoping to chase after my path and catch up to me. But by then, I had already become a nationally renowned agricultural scientist, a professor whose name was known in every corner of the country, dedicating my life to the research and development of new crop varieties. David could only read about me in newspapers, learning that I was attending this seminar, leading that research team, developing another new breed of wheat. Yet no matter how he tried, he could never catch up to my achievements. Not in this lifetime. I spent the rest of my life committed to advancing agricultural science. When I was 80, my health began to fail. On my deathbed, surrounded by my sons and daughters, grandchildren, and a crowd of devoted students, I felt a deep peaceful satisfaction. I knew that even after I was gone, they would carry on the work, contributing to the development of the nation's farmlands generation after generation. In a blurry moment of consciousness, I seemed to see my past self, lying on that cold grassland for my previous life. I smiled and waved at her gently. This time, I had not let myself down. I had fulfilled all the regrets of both my lives. As I held my many medals, large and small, one last time, I closed my eyes with contentment. I hadn't wasted a single year of my life on undeserving people. I hadn't lived in vain. Instead, I had found a career I could dedicate myself to, a true love who cherished me, and the most wonderful children anyone could ask for. Bookmark. This, I thought, was the true meaning of my